Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of Writer's Routine. This week we're chatting to the author of one of the most acclaimed books of the year. Jonny Sweet has just published The Kellerby Code. Not just that, it's been a busy year for him. He wrote Wicked Little Letters, which is a movie starring Olivia Colman. It came out a few months ago. We talk about what joke writing taught him about novel writing. Also why the whole thing came from just an idea of a character's thoughts. And you can hear how much he planned the novel before he actually started.
It was really organic, and I didn't plot it, and I just started writing, which I would normally not recommend. He makes a kind of decision to let himself into his friend's house. And that was the point at which it started to kind of, a story started to happen, and a plot. And as soon as he started making mistakes, then the plot kind of kept sort of presenting itself, and then I had an endpoint in mind, which was fairly simple, and I was just going to try and make that as fun a journey to get to that point as possible.
It's all on the way with Jonny Sweet in a brand new Writer's Routine. Yes, welcome along. My name is Dan Simpson. And this is Writer's Routine. It's the show where we take a sneak peek inside an author's working day. We see what they do, how they do it, where they do it, what gives them the best chance of getting an idea down onto the page. Now, you can support the show if you've learned anything in 300-odd episodes over at patreon.com/writers routine. And if this is the first time that you've found us, thank you. Welcome along. You can see loads more over on X. We are at WritersPod there. Now, this week we're with Jonny Sweet. As a comic, he won the award for Best Newcomer at the 2009 Edinburgh Fringe Festival for his show Mostly About Arthur. Also, he's written with Simon Bird and Joe Thomas from the Inbetweeners in their own comedy troupe. He appeared in Him and Her, Chickens, Babylon, Loaded. As a performer, he says quite openly that you'll know him as that guy from That Thing. He's now making a big mark as a writer. His movie, Wicked Little Letters, feature film, it was picked up by Olivia Colman's production company. She then starred in it, and it was released a few months ago. And he's got a novel out, so it's been a busy time. It's called The Kellerby Code. It's all about Edward, who is living in a world that he can't afford and to which he doesn't belong. So to blend in, to make some cash, he does whatever his friends' needs are. The problem is he's secretly in love with one of them. And the little act of kindness in the group takes a sinister turn. It unleashes the unspeakable brutality Edward has at its core. We talk about why he needs to not hear himself when he's writing. Also what he's learned about novel writing from joke writing. You can hear about why he's lied to so many people about what the plot actually is. We discuss whether whatever he's working on, be it novels or movies or comedy shows, we discuss how the writing process changes. Also, you can hear how much he's thinking through a director's lens. Now he started working in movies. How much is he thinking through that lens when he's writing? And we get into it with what Jonny Sweet sees around him in the place where he sits down to write.
Well, it changes. But I am a cafe writer, the much maligned section of the population who sit in cafes on a laptop with headphones, blaring white noise into my ears to drown out the sounds of sort of ordinary humanity. So I go there a couple. There is actually a complicating factor in this at the moment, which I can tell you about. But I go to local cafes. There are about 3 or 4, and I tend to favour one for a few weeks until I feel as though there's a kind of inevitable familiarity developing with the staff. And as soon as they sort of say, you know, what are you writing, I'll try and sort of disappear for about a month or two, which is really antisocial. I just can't be getting into it. So I go to the same cafe for as long as I can bear, and I have quite kind of I normally sort of have quite a kind of open, boundaried chat about how welcome I am there, because I don't want to sort of annoy them. And I know that often around lunch, they'll get busier. So I sort of say, how do you feel about me sort of stinking up the joint with my laptop? And normally they sort of say, around here, they sort of say, look, come in, and do you mind if I just give you a nod if like there's basically a better offer coming in, which around lunch, but doesn't really happen much, usually because I leave about lunchtime. So normally there are just people having coffee, and some people working on their laptops as well, and a kind of mixture of different sorts of genres of music.
My only fear with a cafe writing is kind of justifying your presence there by buying enough. Like, how long do you feel the need to eke out like a coffee and a pastry?
Well, that's why I have the upfront chat where I say, look, what do you need from me in order for me to stay here? So basically, I get, if I'm there from kind of 9 till 12, half 11, 12, I'll buy 2 coffees. And I'll get an oat flat white and then a double macchiato. Always roughly the same time I'll get the double macchiato, the chaser. And as long as I feel I've said to them, look, I don't want to take the piss, then I feel it's fine. Sometimes I'll stay for lunch. But the complicating factor at the moment is that there's a man in... This is a fairly funny, but also quite disturbing story. You're welcome to edit this out. There's a man in Crouch End who, over the past couple of weeks, he thinks I'm someone else, and he really, really wants to beat me up. And he goes to the same cafes as me, and he's quite scary. He wears these Ray-Bans. He doesn't look physically intimidating, but he's quite wiry, and he's got an odd vibe. And he's repeatedly told me that I'm called Paul, and he told me that he beat the shit out of me at a Slime Fest, which I've looked up, and it's some sort of festival. And so it's happened about 5 or 6 times. So now my kind of cafes have been massively reduced, because we happen to overlap. He might be a writer, although he's not writing when I see him. But so that's an added element to my writing day, is that I'm also trying to dodge someone who's kind of out for my blood. It's difficult.
Yeah, that's not something you need to almost encroach on creativity. So why are you in the cafes? Why are you not someone who can just plonk yourself on your sofa or on a desk? What is it about being out and about that helps you?
2 things. I like to get out in the morning. I think for me, it's important to have somewhere to go. And I've got young children, and so I'm up at kind of 6, and the whole first section of my day is trying to effect an exit and trying to persuade them desperately to just leave. And so to return to the field of battle, it would be fairly kind of, it would just feel quite disappointing. So I just like to be out for a bit. And also I do have a desk at home, and I've got a study, and I do work in there. Sometimes what I do is there's a kind of late afternoon second burst there, and I do kind of Zoom meetings and things like that there. But I think I like to be in a place where there's a bit of activity. I think I quite like stuff going on around me, and I don't think I do great thinking when I can kind of hear myself think. I think I often think better when I'm walking, for example, or exercising, or I think occasionally, if I'm really working well, I can actually just work anywhere. If I'm on a roll with something, whereas if I'm trying to work something out, the sound of my own thoughts would be quite intimidating. So I think that's why.
And is that the same for all your projects, because of the different things that you write? So stand-up solo shows and sketches, and now movies and novels. Have you found that your brain works in different ways depending on what you're doing, and they require different moods and spaces?
Well, I think that different media and genres and things are also slightly to do with a development that I've gone through chronologically as well. So I definitely wrote in a different way when I did solo shows, but that was almost 10 years ago. And the mistake I made then was I had a great work ethic in theory, in that I would go to the British Library from 9 till 5 and I would stare into space for about 8 hours and then go home. When comedy really is just whittling nothing out of nothing. But one version of the nothing makes people laugh. In my case, because it was silly, it was kind of abstract character. It was slightly some weird comedy. It wasn't like I was tackling a subject. I mean, it was gobbledygook. Let's be honest. So I think what's changed is that I think I've learned how to be effective better. So I know, for example, that really I think I can work until sort of midday or 12:30, no matter what time I start. But because I have children, I always start at about 9. But I think I could start from about 8 or even earlier with a fair wind and write until then. And then something happens when I have lunch, and I kind of become a slightly different person. I just become really sort of thick and boring and sort of shut down. And it's just a carb coma. Even if I haven't had any carbs, I kind of have a lobotomy because of lunch. And then, and again, I feel like I'm really slagging off family life. But then if I didn't have kids, I would definitely have a second wind later. But normally, I'm persuading them to come back into the house. I've tried to persuade them to exit early in the day. And I think there is definitely a very different feel for me between screenwriting and novel writing, and it's funny because it's not really a choice you make, but screenwriting is so kind of architectural, I often think, and the way I find it, I'm always trying to find the sort of structure, the order of scenes with screenwriting, and so. And often, I think in both kinds, but especially in screenwriting, I'm throwing shit at the wall and seeing what kind of sticks and what works. Whereas with novel writing, I feel like it's just a slower process, and it's different because you're doing the camera work yourself in novel writing. In screenwriting, you're providing a plan for the director and the actors, and a skeleton, a kind of skeleton. Whereas in novel writing, you're doing everything, so you're spending longer on those other things. When you're writing, you're trying to set tone and trying to direct the camera at the right thing, and so I feel like I move through scenes a lot slower, but it takes a bit longer. But I'm slightly less likely to throw it away at the end of the day. There's a lot of churn in screenwriting for me. I mean, I often imagine I'll throw away most of the first draft in screenwriting, whereas in a novel, I throw away less, but I still throw away quite a lot, sadly. The first book probably does have elements of screenplay, does have visual set pieces like you'd have in screenplays. But I certainly wasn't conscious of it writing it, and that turn of phrase then was really more to contrast it with screenwriting and say you're doing such a small percentage of the work of the final product in a screenplay. And so really what you're trying to do is get a structure that's kind of solid. But no, it must have a big impact. And I think what screenwriting teaches me and taught me is sort of there's lots of things to do with detail. but they're detail that actually you wouldn't put into a screenplay, but you'd watch in a final product, and that an actor might ways that an actor might communicate a line without saying anything. And I do think I'm aware of behavior and performance when I'm writing character. I think I remember P.G. Wodehouse said, when you write a novel, you should make sure that if it was a play, every actor would be delighted with their part. And that has stuck with me, probably because I've been a screenwriter. It's a good test for me anyway, to check how much each character has to do, and if they're pulling their weight, and if they're being put under enough pressure, or if they're being stretched or working. I know that Martin Amis is very funny about writers having different attitudes towards their characters, and some just watch them do what they do and just transcribe it as though their fictional characters are completely autonomous from them. And lots of people say that. Howard Pinter said he couldn't get his characters to do what he wanted them to do. Whereas Nabokov said that something like whole forests shed their leaves when I approach because they're so terrified of him, in the fictional world. So something like that. So definitely, like I think of them as characters in the way a screenwriter would, and you're trying to give them good roles, I guess. But other than that, I don't think about a camera. That was just a kind of turn of phrase. I definitely don't think like that, because really I wanted to write novels before I wanted to do comedy. It was just a fairly circuitous route. So I've always thought in terms of writing novels.
And if anyone ever kind of quotes Wodehouse, it immediately makes me believe anything you say, like 1,000% more. So just marking out the differences between two things. I know that you said you've always wanted to write novels, but you got into it through comedy, and I'm sure you were noodling around with prose and with books. But starting off and getting some acclaim for writing Edinburgh shows, it's a completely different style of writing, because it's you there for, I don't know, 45 minutes on your own. You have to hook an audience's attention. You have to keep them with you. I mean, you went on to win an award with it, so you obviously did that quite well. What did that grounding of writing a solo comedy show teach you, and that may about novel writing and storytelling that maybe you would not have got any other way?
Well, I think jokes have to be really precise, and they demand of you quite a kind of brutal command of language. I think when you're writing something, it either works or it doesn't, and often that's of course delivery as well. But I do think there are certain ways of phrasing that are very important. The funny thing about my first live show that kind of got my comedy career going was that it wasn't stand up. It was a character who was putting on a show to rescue the reputation of his late brother. It was quite weird. It was about his dead brother, and he was trying to kind of promote what an amazing person this was. And weirdly, that is a kind of novel idea, because it was clear that in the show that his brother was quite mean to him, to this character, and all that came out in sort of ways that the character I was performing wasn't really aware of, and it was clear that the guy was a douchebag, and it wasn't really clear. So in a way, that there was a bit of kind of those techniques are very novelly. They're more novelly than stand-up-y. I mean, my second show was much more, slightly more straight comedy. So I don't know. I think live performance, I do think it's a great discipline, because it's so brutal, and you get such little time to grab the audience, like you say, but also failure in that kind of scenario is a very good lesson, and it's really clear when it's happened. I've definitely had some absolutely awful experiences. But I imagine you pick up lots of bad traits as well. I mean, I think and similarly with screenwriting, going from screenwriting to novel writing, I think it's really tempting to be too hooky. And I actually think that reading a novel is a really intimate sort of experience. I think it's the opposite of live comedy, really. It's private, and so there are some things that you would do in comedy and screenwriting, perhaps more in TV, that would turn off probably lots of readers of novels. So it's a balance, essentially. And I think, really, I think I just did love both. I think at that age, I really loved comedy, and my kind of heroes at the time were comedians and novelists, and I would kind of fanboy over Jeff Dyer and Tim Key, people like that at the same time.
So let's jump back to your day. You mentioned that you like to start by 9 when you've shepherded children. You're in the cafe. You've got a condensed mostly 3 hour slot. How much do you know about what you want to get done in those 3 hours? How like efficient do you need to make yourself, because you know that's all the time you got that day?
Yes, I do need to be efficient, and I do want to get to a word count, but I do forgive myself when I don't, because frankly, what else am I going to do other than forgive myself? And I always make sure that I end the writing session knowing what I'm going to write next, and knowing that there's some, I know what the next little bit will be, so that I can get into it and enjoy getting into it the next day. With screenwriting, again, I normally have quite a close outline, which I don't so far. I mean, I'm only into my second novel, but I don't have such a strict outline for the novel, which means sometimes I will kind of get home in a kind of nauseous haze of anxiety, not knowing what I'm going to be writing next, or how I'm going to solve the problem, or what's wrong with it. And then I have a rule of I can't fall asleep until I know. And again, these rules are there's not much, there's no sort of state enforced action that's going to happen if I don't. But so I normally try and sort of fix whatever problem it is before I fall asleep, so that I can go in. So that's the main thing. So when I open the document on the laptop, I'm not thinking. I just hate the feeling of looking at a blank piece of paper and just having absolutely nothing. But partly because I have that short amount of time, and there's not much wiggle room for the domestic reasons I mentioned. There's not loads of time for me to kind of take a 4-hour walk or go to the National Gallery like I used to, and find ideas like that. I need to be a bit more efficient.
Like, that's an easy thing to say, right? I need to be more efficient. But the practicalities of making that happen, if we could all just switch on the tap of, right, I need to be creative now, then, well, this podcast probably wouldn't exist, and many more of us would be probably brilliant published writers. So how have you learnt that?
God. Well, I don't know. So if I go back to when I would sit and stare into space and kind of go to the British Library desk and just get books about a random subject to kind of do something with my time there, I think I delay when I feel like I've really started something. I think that's a big thing. So if I have an idea, I'll sort of decide it's the beginnings of an idea at the back of my head, but I probably won't get round. It'll normally be, it seems as though it'll be a couple of years or something until I kind of sit down to write it, I think. And so, and I do, in the back of my head, I am always sort of trying to think ahead. normally out of a general kind of background sense of terror that I will run out. Or so I think it's probably that, and then trying to make sure I've done enough planning ahead of time so that when I get to it, there's something there. People write so differently, and obviously, some novels and lots of probably some of my favorite novels couldn't be written in that method. And I do think that sometimes, as I kind of learn more about writing, I might, slightly take away some of those craft or maybe genre elements that help me to write, in order to maybe try and write something slightly different and challenge myself in a different way. Because there are certainly some novels that I think my approach just wouldn't work for. So I mean, that's a long way of saying, don't know how to answer your question. But I mean, I think, what I do think is something about being a freelancer and having done it for a while, and since the days of Edinburgh, when it would be a month before or a week or sometimes a day before or during an Edinburgh run, not having an ending, not having something, maybe that's an area where that live stuff helped, because there was always a DIY kind of just fix it approach. And similarly in TV, there's always a reason why a scene that you've carefully nurtured for months can't be filmed, because the locations had a kind of oven fire or something, and so you have to think. So there maybe it's those kind of adrenaline-y crises that help, but I don't really know.
I hope you're enjoying the show. I'm just popping up to remind you that if you are learning something from Jonny, from someone who has had an incredible year, then you can say thank you to us for this over on our Patreon page. It's just me that works on the podcast, that brings you as many episodes with the best authors I can, as often as possible. And you can help make that happen over at patreon.com/writers routine. For that, you get merch, there is bonus content, there is even a way for your book to sponsor this show. So, it's been like 310 episodes or so now, if you've learned anything along the way from all manner of different authors. New ones, successful ones, people who have been there then stopped, some prolific authors, all types, they're all on the show for you. And you can help it carry on by becoming a backer for as much as you like, for as often as you like. It's just wonderful to have you support it over at patreon.com/writers routine. Let's get back to it then with Jonny Sweet. We're talking about his new novel, The Kellerby Code. It's hugely recommended, blurbs and reviews from some of the world's best writers. We talk about why the story came from just an idea of a character's thought that Jonny simply wanted to find out more about. Also hear why he's been lying to a lot of people about the plot. And we jump back in, talking a bit more about the day. How does he feel when it's not been as productive as he'd have liked?
I've sort of decided that shame and disappointment is really unproductive and doesn't help anyone. And there was a bit actually where before Christmas I talked to my agent about, I think she said, "How are you looking for the deadline?" And I was really nodding as vigorously as I could, because I honestly didn't really know what the deadline was. And I had basically got it completely wrong in my head, and I was going to be months and months late. But I do think in general I've been too on time. And what you hear is that most writers are late, and so I've just decided to do the best I can. Life's complicated. There's always life things coming up as well, and you just cannot beat yourself up. Also, I think the same really for me applies to when you read something you've written and it's terrible. There's no shame in that. it's bad if it's published like that. But I am quite. I try to be quite kind to myself, partly because it just saps your energy as well. You just need to almost. I make myself into a sort of dead-eyed chugging machine and just try to keep going, because writing a novel's hard and it's a marathon.
Are you concerned as you're writing if you know it's terrible, or are you just fine getting the words out?
I try to feel that it's good when I'm writing it, and I try to write it in a mood that makes me feel that it's in some way meaningful to me. But equally, when I start the day, I start by reading the last, couple of thousand words or something and rewriting, so that I kind of when I finish and when I'm writing, I know that it's not the last. It's going to be like that maximum for another 24 hours. And to be honest, you are doing that for all of it, all the way through. And even in the final proofs, I was kind of fairly disgusted with some of my first novel and was rewriting it. And so that takes the pressure off. But yeah, I never really, unless sometimes there's a bit where you sort of have to get someone across town or from A to B. And sometimes it's hard for there to be a particularly graceful or interesting way to describe that. Sometimes I think I'll kick that can down the road and just say they went to Athens, for example.
Let's talk about the debut then, Jonny. It's the Kellerby Code, and this has come, highly acclaimed, highly recommended, all sorts of blurbs going on and rave reviews on the back of it, which we will talk about in just a second. But just tell us about the very first moment. You've always wanted to write a novel. Tell us about the first moment that the idea for this story came into your head.
Well, it was a character, actually, and I had it in mind that I was going to write a novel for a long time. I've written lots of short stories, often hoping that one of them might, present itself as a possible novel. It never did. And I just wrote a few scenes of this guy, Edward, at dinner with some friends, and that he was at dinner with them, and the rage was kind of slowly building inside him, and that was it, really. And none of that is in the book, but I just felt as though there was something there, and that was it. And in a weird way, the idea for the book and the premise for the book, and certainly what the press has been around for the book, wasn't really much in my mind when I was writing it, and only partially as I completed it. So it was all just about the character, and I'm sure that I share facets with the character. So I was probably trying to purge myself of elements of my own psyche, but that was it. That was as boring as that sounds. I was just writing some scenes that I just sort of liked his vibe and wanted to find out and wanted to kind of write more about him.
Then you decide this is going to be a novel. So, it's an open-ended, simple question. What happens next? How does the plot spring up from this character, Edward, that you've got, his rage, these scenes that you've been playing around with? What's the stage to get a formal plot out of this?
It was really organic, and I didn't plot it, and I just started writing, which I would normally not recommend. But oddly enough, it's sort of what I've done with the second book as well. And I threw most of that away as well. But I was just finding characters, and in the end, I kind of compressed whatever that was, probably 20, 25, 30,000 words or something. And I suppose in the end, that was roughly a kind of the opening chapter or something, in terms of what it was telling a reader. and then I did get a little hook, I suppose, in that he does something. He makes a kind of decision to let himself into his friend's house, and that was the point at which it started to kind of a story started to happen, and a plot, and as soon as he started making mistakes, then the plot kind of kept sort of presenting itself, and then I had an endpoint in mind, which was fairly simple, and I was just going to try and make that as fun a journey to get to that point as possible, and as difficult for Edward. And then once I got to the end, that was when I kind of knew I had to sort of go back and write it again, or rewrite it and find the things that were juicy and make them meaningful, or the things that were dramatic and make them more dramatic or more meaningful to the characters, and make sure that and find ways to essentially make the best of what I had. So it was a very kind of long process, but by the time I got to kind of a third of the way through the plot as it is in the book, it was quite enjoyable, actually, and it came in sharp contrast to this book I'm writing at the moment. It came quite easily, and it was quite fun. But I think maybe that was because I had spent such a long time writing fairly boring scenes, where I was probably, which are all binned, where I was probably like working out the stuff I needed to work out in the long run. So there's a lot of wastage, and even when I had gone back and written it again, there was probably 30,000 words that I cut before I sent it to an agent for the first time.
Talking about that wastage, Jonny, you mentioned earlier on that through your years of writing, you've got better at the I guess the efficiency of it is how we were saying, that you no longer spend 8 hours staring at blank walls in the British Library. Now you've got your first book out there and you've had to ditch 30,000 words and you had to re-go over it. How much are you actively thinking about ways that you can not do that next time and get it closer to what's published the first time round, just to save yourself a lot of effort?
It would be good. I think it may annoyingly be my process, very annoyingly. I feel with a book much more than, again, with screenwriting, that I do feel like I'm trying to tap into a real emotion of my own, and with screenwriting that's not the case for me, and I think that maybe that process of just kind of writing and seeing where you get to is quite good for kind of getting into your subconscious, if that's not a kind of a heinous term to use these days. So I don't mind about being inefficient, really. I need to make sure that I'm sort of trying to write at those few hours in the first half of the day. But I've always felt that writing stuff and binning it somehow is making what you're writing better. I think really good writers would just write something good the first. I know Graham Greene used to write, was it 300 or 500 words a day, but they would essentially be exactly as they would appear in the final novel, which is galling. I mean, that is irritating. But I have always felt that if you're throwing things away, something of the effort, something of the labor will tell ultimately, because you're experimenting and you're probing the kind of extremities of the story and of the characters and what it oughtn't to be. but I think I have to tell myself that, otherwise I'll feel a little bit sort of vertigo-y about all the time I'm wasting.
As I said, this book has come highly acclaimed. As I mentioned, like Richard Osman, the UK's biggest real writer right now, has talked about it massively. You've got really good recommendations and blurbs on the back. As this is published and finishing, getting your second done, and having a movie out as well, how much has that absorbed you? Like, how much has the praise for the first got in the way and affected how you think of your second, and maybe how you might go on thinking of future novels?
Well, since I've started, since the Edinburgh days, I've had very, very bad reviews and some nice reviews all the way through at different times, and often counterintuitive to how I feel, but like a real mixture. And in the past, I've in the past, I definitely used to feel like good reviews meant nothing and bad reviews meant everything and were kind of true, and they'd seen into the deficiencies of my soul, and I always knew I was terrible, that kind of thing. So I've tried. I mean, I haven't read any reviews of the book. I've tried to avoid reviews of the film as well. I just try to keep my head down, because I don't think either of them ultimately make me feel good, good or bad. Weirdly, I think they all just make me a little bit edgy, and I really just want to protect my writing process, because there was a bit when I did a sitcom that I was in and I wrote, I put a lot of pressure on myself, and it became so the whole experience became so stressful that it wasn't fulfilling, and I didn't really even know what I was trying to make. And I think since then I've just tried to protect my daily practice, my kind of writing practice and process as much as possible, and try and keep those sorts of things out of it, because I also you do learn as you grow up that when you watch other things or you read other things and then you read reviews of them, often I read the reviews thinking, what are you talking about? Either way, positively or negatively. So I try and just all I really want to do is to kind of keep doing it, and those things you just can't do anything about it. Similarly to sales, I don't know anything about book sales or anything. I'm just trying to. Having said all of that, I do think the second book, having gone out and it's sort of finished in terms of my kind of, there's a little flurry of kind of press and promotion and stuff like that. Now that's finished, I'm much more relaxed about doing the book, because also you have to kind of advocate for these things that often people said to me, a completely normal and extremely acceptable question: why did you write the book? And I'd often be like, I don't know, no idea. And I felt like once that was all out the way, and I felt I was often just literally lying to people about sort of what the book was about, because I didn't really have enough of a conversation piece to tell them if I didn't start to kind of improvise. So to that extent, it's true that, the book and the film that was the month before, now they're out and in my rearview mirror, I do feel much more relaxed about just getting on with the work, which is the bit I enjoy.
And that is it for this week's Writer's Routine. Thank you so much to Jonny Sweet for coming on the show. The new novel is The Kellerby Code. You might have seen it. You can get a copy right now. Independent bookshops, I always think, are the way to go for that one. Now, you can support the show over at patreon.com/Writers Routine. You can drop us a follow on X. We are at WritersPod there, and get in touch using the contact form at writersroutine.com. Now, I've kind of mentioned for a little while that things are slowing down I would say, for June and just the first week or so of July. So you won't have an episode next week. You will have an episode the week after, which is the 14th. And then I'm taking a few weeks off. So I will then see you again early July. That's the current plan. Back again on the 14th with another author sharing their writer's routine. Until then, thanks for listening. Bye.